All right, and sitting down with us to talk some football, we've got former CFL player with the BC Lions, Kyle Kirkwood. Kyle, how are you doing today?
Doing not bad, Kyle. How are you doing, buddy?
Doing pretty good. Two Kyles. We're going to launch our own podcast there, like Zach Galifianakis, Between Two Ferns. It'll be Between Two Kyles there.
I don't know if anybody would go on that podcast.
No, it would just be us talking to each other the whole time, I think. So, first and foremost here, a bit of a wild weekend there for a lot of the teams. It was sort of a foregone conclusion. All right, our season's done. Let's pack it in, make sure no one gets hurt, and head off to Cabo for the weekend after that.
Yeah.
But quite a few matchups that did end up shaking up sort of the playoff picture for us there. We'll start off breaking them down by each match, but let's start with the AFC here. So if we're going to look at the Colts versus Bills, what are some of the things that you're looking for in that matchup that could actually turn the tides?
Yeah. So from a Buffalo perspective, I mean, who's going to cover Stephon Diggs? That's really been the question the last few weeks. I mean, anybody who's watched the Bills the last month has really understood how good this guy actually is. And now, obviously Josh Allen is stepping his game up quite significantly. And, having a guy like Stephon Diggs being able to, not only take over a game just by himself, but, really open up the field for other guys like Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis. I mean, I think that's really going to be a strong dictator of how Buffalo is able to move the ball down the field, because if Indianapolis can't solve the Stephon Diggs equation, then I don't really think that they have a chance. Going to, from an Indianapolis perspective, the thing that they have going for them is that they are a big physical team, both offensively and defensively. And if you look at Buffalo, they're really not, that big across the board, especially in the defensive line. They're young, they're quick, they're fast. But when you look at that Colts offensive line and the running game that they've had the last, 6-7 weeks of the season with Jonathan Taylor running absolutely wild, I think that's going to be a big dictator for them. If they can control the clock and really pound that Buffalo defense down with that big offensive line, I think that they can really, make some noise in that game for sure.
Yeah. No, I agree as well too, right? There's some things that I like about the Colts, right? I like their defense. I like Jonathan Taylor. I love Rex Specs, Rodrigo Blankenship there, kicking field goals. But
he has the biggest biceps in the league.
Yeah, there you go. I like the fact that they might take Carson Wentz off the Eagles' hands in the offseason there. But,
yeah, we'll see.
Other than that's sort of where it stops for me, right? Yeah. Phillip Rivers and playoff success don't exactly go hand in hand. And if you've even been watching some of the last couple weeks worth of throws that he's been putting out there, if he doesn't retire at the end of this season, I think it'll be the biggest shocker in the NFL, because, he's got a wet noodle for an arm at this point in his career, and someone's got to look after his 45 kids at home. So
yeah,
he's probably starting to think about, the next phase of his career. But what's also a bit puzzling to me too is just the wide receivers that the Colts have, right? T.Y. Hilton has been the biggest boom bust player in the league, I would say, for the last 2 or 3 seasons. He either goes out and puts up, 10 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown, or he's literally, reenacting Weekend at Bernie's and is just a corpse out there, right? So, they're a team that's built to play with the lead, right? If they hop out and go up 10-0 and can rely on their defense, they can rely on just, Jonathan Taylor pounding the ball up and down the field, they've got an outside chance. But they're not a team that's built to put up points quickly. So if the Bills, who have been lighting the world on fire offensively for the last couple of weeks, if they jump out to a quick lead, I think this could get ugly pretty quickly. So I think, if anything, that first quarter in this game is going to be probably the most important quarter of the whole game. It's who's going to dictate their will in that.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Actually, talking about Phillip Rivers a little bit more, obviously his playoff success hasn't really been his forte over the course of his career. I like to kind of consider this as the old risk taker versus the young risk taker. Mm-hmm. Who's going to take care of the ball more? Obviously, Rivers has shown a tendency to turn the ball over quite frequently in big moments. And, obviously Josh Allen's had a good turnaround season this year, but from what we've seen of him in big games, he also does turn the ball over quite a bit. So if he can hang on to the ball, then Buffalo has a great shot. If Phillip Rivers can control the ball and not take those chances that have gotten him into trouble in the past, I think that Indianapolis can actually, put up a good fight in this game. So, realistically, I agree with what you're saying. However, I do think that Indianapolis does hold a little bit of an advantage in this game, just due to the fact that I like their defense from top to bottom a little bit more than Buffalo. And I think that in the playoffs, especially, it's going to be cold in Buffalo. The way that teams are going to get out to a good, strong lead is when they establish the run early, because the run dictates play action. Play action dictates, throwing the ball downfield. So once you start to, really control the clock and really control the run game, it opens up so much more of your offense. And then Phillip Rivers doesn't have to step up and take over that game. We can rely on the run game a little bit more. So, and obviously, I think I know where you're leaning on this one, but I think that, for me, it's going to be whoever turns the ball over less. And, really looking at it from top to bottom, I think Indianapolis takes care of the football a little bit better than Buffalo does. So I think I'm going to pick the upset in this one and go with the Indianapolis Colts.
Oh, wow. Look at us. We're in our first matchup of the night, and we're already disagreeing here. You know what? If this was last year's version of the Buffalo Bills, where Josh Allen was wildly inaccurate and you never knew whether he was going to, go 25 for 30 or 12 for 40, right? Or you had Frank Gore even sprinkled in inexplicably, churning up yards and all that there. I just think this year's version of the Buffalo Bills is built a little bit differently. Are they going to match up super well with every team that they're going to come across in the playoffs? Probably not. But just for what the Colts can offer, the fact that, it is the first home playoff game in Buffalo, and God knows how long they're letting in, I think it's 7,000 Bills Mafia there for a stadium. They're going to be as loud as 70,000 people in there.
Yeah,
so, they're
sure.
going to be going absolutely nuts. I don't think this is going to be a highlight reel game by any stretch of the imagination, but I see Buffalo taking care of business here. So I'm going to differ. I'm going to go Bills at home, take care of the Colts there.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I'll just leave this one on is, I think Kansas City had the blueprint for how to beat the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah.
And when you look at what Kansas City did, even though they are a pass first team and they can light up a scoreboard, what did they do all game? They imposed their will, they ran the ball, and Buffalo had no answer for them. And no one's been willing to do that since. So I wouldn't be surprised if Buffalo runs away with this one, but something inside of me is just telling me that Indianapolis is going to take control of the ball early and they're going to hold on to that lead.
Yeah. And the irony being is, it's not that I don't like the Colts. I think had the Colts actually won the division and actually drawn Baltimore, I think that's a matchup that suits them a lot better. It's just, I just don't like, when I'm looking across the board as far as weapons on the Buffalo side versus weapons on the Colts side there, I'm going Buffalo all day. So anyways, let's move on here. Speaking of the Ravens, why don't we go to Ravens versus Titans here? You want to go first or second on this one? You
can go first on this one. You can go first on this one.
Okay, all right. So to be honest, I really don't see too much script-wise changing from when these guys met last year. I think it's almost going to be plugging in, the exact same game tape and seeing a steady dose of Derrick Henry running up and down the field. Tannehill not doing anything spectacular, but being on point and making the passes he needs to make. I really did think that when the Titans lost Lewin Taylor earlier in the season, I thought, okay, well, there goes their chances of even making the playoffs, right? When you lose a Pro Bowl tackle like that. Okay, Derrick Henry, maybe few less yards and all that. Well, all he does is just go and stiff arm people into oblivion and becomes the 8th person to ever put up 2,000 rushing yards in a season. So clearly not missing too much there. But, I think it's been more so the emergence of some of their younger weapons and the advance that, and AJ Brown has taken. And just look at this past weekend there. You think, okay, well, here we go to overtime, right? With the Texans game there. And what do they do? Well, AJ Brown just, for whatever reason, there's no safety over the top there. And here we go. There's a 45-yard bomb and kick the winning field goal, right? So the defense is what scares me about the Titans, right? They can either go out there and hold the opposing team to under 10 points, or they're in a shootout with the Texans, who, aside from Deshaun Watson, what are they really marching out there that's Pro Bowl worthy or anything?
Yeah.
But I think Mike Vrabel sort of gets them playing as one. They've got sort of that blueprint already of, all right, this is what worked last year. And more so than that, what it really comes down to is, I think in a lot of areas, the Titans have maybe taken a step forward this year, whereas the Ravens have taken a step backwards, right? Yeah, yeah. Lamar Jackson playing at an MVP level last year. This year, it wasn't bad, right? But all of his numbers regressed. Everything from completion percentage to quarterback rating, yards, touchdowns, more interceptions, everything like that. And I think this is probably moving forward more so the version that Ravens fans can probably expect to see, right? He's not going to be a perennial MVP candidate. He'll be serviceable, he'll be better than good, but he's not going to be that number one quarterback in the league for a decade to come here. So I think the Ravens probably wanted a little bit more out of Hollywood Brown and Mark Andrews, sort of taking those steps forward. Why they're not feeding their young running back in Dobbins the ball more? It's almost like the Buffalo Bills last year, where they had too many running backs, and for whatever reason, they wanted to get everyone 8+ touches a game, so no one really gets a hot hand, right? So you got Gus Edwards and all of them scampering around. So I think it's probably going to be very similar to last year. I'm leaning towards Titans on this one.
Well, I would love to say that I would agree with you on this one, but I am in complete disagreement with you on this one once again, my friend. So
This is why we brought you on.
absolutely,
There you go.
absolutely. Yeah, so basically I'll start with your points on the Ravens. And I mean, when you look at the body of work over a 16-game schedule for Lamar Jackson, yes, the numbers have regressed from last year, from his MVP caliber season. But if you look at the course of what have you done for me lately, and I look at the last month of the season when it was clutch, it was go time. Ravens needed to win out to to even make the playoffs. Lamar Jackson put the team on his shoulders and really came through in the clutch when he needed to and led his team to the playoffs. So I'm looking at the way Lamar Jackson's playing right now, and I arguably would say that he is playing at a better level now than what he was last year at this point, which is what you want going into the playoffs. I think last year was a little bit too big of a moment for them. I think it came a little bit too easy for them last year, going back to your point of, they took a step back, but it was easy for them. They kind of cruised through the regular season. They got the number one overall seed. Everything was fine. And then they ran into an absolute buzzsaw in Tennessee last year. Well, I think that was a really bad taste in their mouth that kind of left, the last 11 months since that game happened. And, John Harbaugh is such a good coach that, he'll have his team ready to go. And, don't think that they haven't been, marking this on their calendars since last January. So again, going to what Baltimore is doing, I think that, yes, earlier on in the season, they were completely mismanaging the running back situation. They were trying to feed too many mouths, and there wasn't enough to go around. But now I think they're starting to realize that a guy like J.K. Dobbins is that explosive weapon that they didn't have at this point last year. Mark Ingram, obviously he's taken a beating over his career. He's had a really great career, but his time is winding down. He's been healthy scratched the last couple of weeks. Gus Edwards is a nice change of pace back, big body, can wear down a defense, but he's not a bell cow back. J.K. Dobbins is that guy who can get the tough yards in between the tackles, who can break a 70-yard run, as we saw last week against Cincinnati. He really is that game breaker who can, take over a game if he really needs to. And adding in the element of Lamar Jackson's legs to that as well opens up that much, that many more lanes for Dobbins to run through. And again, if the Ravens get the run game going, they have 2,000-yard running backs back there. If you want to, take into consideration, J.K. Dobbins mixed with Lamar Jackson. That's the beauty of having a guy like Lamar Jackson back there. He's such a dangerous, explosive dual threat that he is another running back there. And, going into their weapons like a Marquise Brown, like a Mark Andrews, like a Willie Snead, I think you're going to see a lot of these guys step up because they see their quarterback putting everything on, on his back, saying, come on, guys, like, let's go. So, Marquise Brown's really been, again, balling out the last couple of weeks. He's got 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Mark Andrews has kind of been lying in the weeds a little bit, but I think you can really see him get involved quite a bit, early and often against Tennessee. So, I really like the way that Baltimore is playing going into this game. Now, from a Tennessee perspective, huge fan of Mike Vrabel. I think if any team embodies what their head coach is about and who he is, I think Tennessee and Mike Vrabel are a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
They're going to tell you they're going to beat you up, and then they're going to go and beat you up, and they're going to say, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Tennessee's not flashy, but if you watch what they do, it's kind of, really refreshing to see how they win football games. too often you see teams that are involved in these shootout games, they fold, and they'll turn the ball over, they'll make a bad read, the running back will fumble the ball. You don't see Tennessee do that. Tennessee is one of the coolest teams under pressure in the NFL, and that's why every time they're in one of these games like they were in last week, they usually come out on top because they know they have the best player on the field in Derrick Henry. They know that they've got a good physical offensive line even without Taylor Lewan. They know that Ryan Tannehill is a smart quarterback and he's not going to make too many mistakes because he doesn't have to. And now you add in the elements of an AJ Brown who's turning into an absolute stud, and Corey Davis who's taken the next step up as a first-round receiver. You have those weapons on the outside that can really spread out a defense and create those running lanes for Derrick Henry up the middle. So, from what Tennessee does versus what Baltimore does, this is the game I'm really anxious to watch this weekend because I think that this is actually the best matchup that people can hope for. Yeah. And again, like the key matchup, I think when it comes down to it is, who's going to take over the game more? Is it going to be Lamar Jackson? Is it going to be Derrick Henry? And I think who's ever able to do that is going to be the team that comes out on top in the end.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, and for the exact same reason, right? I've got this one circled as my must-watch game this weekend. Don't even get me started on some of the NFC slates there. We'll get to them in a minute, but this is definitely the one with the most intrigue. And right. I think, I'm not going to try and sway your opinion here, but I think what it's all going to come down to is, if you're the Titans, that they're going to try and establish the run so that they can open up all these other things for them, right? The Titans aren't going to make any bones about it. They're going to have a spy on Jackson the whole time, and they're going to stuff the box and dare the Ravens. Guess what? Lamar, you're going to have to prove with your arm that you're going to be able to beat us. And I think eventually at some point in his career, he is going to become a very polished passer and he'll figure it out. But right now, I think he's still just too quick to tuck the ball away and try and do it with his legs. And I think he might do it one too many times, get himself into trouble. And for that reason, I'm kind of even thinking it's a similar scoreline. I think it was like 28-12 last year. I think it's like 28-14. Maybe they get a late garbage sort of cover for 28-21. But I think they just wear them down. And in that second half, we're going to see a patented, 50-yard Derrick Henry breaks free. And that's just the bone that, or straw that snaps the camel's back right there.
Right on. Well, you know what? This is why I like having these conversations because people's, opinions can differ so much, but they're always fun to talk about. And I think this is going to be an absolute shootout. I think the offenses are going to show up. And I think that, at the end of the day, Baltimore's just going to have a little bit too much, from those two guys that they have in the backfield with Lamar and J.K. Dobbins. And I think this is going to be in the realm of like a 42-35 style game.
Woo. Taking the over.
Yeah, a little bit. We'll take the over just a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm definitely going to let you have first crack at this one here, right? Because I have a sneaking suspicion I know where you're going to go with it. But we'll see here. So we've got Browns versus Steelers. What do you got for me?
Yeah. So again, this is a matchup that I think a lot of people have been circling again to look forward to in the playoffs based on the past history of Pittsburgh and Cleveland, not just from the last couple of years, but just over the course of the two franchises. Obviously they're very close in proximity, playing the same division. Anytime you get divisional football in the playoffs, it's always a good time. Especially when you incorporate the AFC North. The AFC North is typically nasty, physical. A really exciting brand of football, even when it's not a high-scoring game. You look at any of those, former games with Pittsburgh versus Baltimore in their heyday, and then a couple of years ago with Pittsburgh and Cincinnati when they had a really, back and forth, slobber knocker type game.
Vontae's perfect, just decapitating people over.
Yeah, but again, thank you, Vontae's and Pac-Man, for allowing Pittsburgh to move up the field and kick the winning field goal. So, yeah, again, whenever you have an opportunity to see divisional football in the playoffs, it's always a really fun, game to watch because the atmosphere is just so much different, even though they play each other twice a year. That third game is always going to be the best game. And, when you incorporate the AFC North, something special about the AFC North in January in the playoffs, just, beating the snot out of each other. So,
for those that are listening right now on the podcast version, you can't see him, but he's got a real twinkle in his eye right now, just talking about Steelers and AFC North football.
Again, it's just something magical about it that it just brings out the best in people. So, but yeah, I mean, I think when you kind of break down the matchup a little bit more, this is the first time for the Browns in the playoffs in 18 years. This is something you talk about Bills fans suffering for a long time. Well, Cleveland is, just as, if not more, wanting of anything that resembles playoff football in Cleveland. And, even though they're on the road, this is Cleveland's time to really bask this in and soak it in. And I actually have some relatives who live in Cleveland, and we've been going back and forth at each other over the last, few years and whatnot. So I'm sure there will be some expletives flying around a little bit between our two households. But, is it going to be a case of Cleveland being out of the playoffs for 18 years? They had to win their last game to get in after they lost two horrible games before that. Now they're in. Okay, now what?
Yeah.
They're playing a primetime game, 8:20 on Sunday night. That's the game that everyone's going to tune into. Is that moment going to be too big for them, added on to the fact that this is the first time in 18 years? A lot of these guys are young. They've been built up from the ground. And again, their head coach is out, with COVID this weekend, so they're going to have a new, a new game caller. There's a lot of moving factors in there. Now, when you look at it from a Pittsburgh perspective, Pittsburgh kind of limped into the playoffs when you look at how they started as opposed to how they finished.
That would be putting it mildly, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at the front half of the season, Pittsburgh looked like the best team in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at their body of work over the last 6 weeks of the season, you would really say that, man, this team looks like a 9-7, 8-8 style team, because their offense is almost unrecognizable. Mm-hmm. They weren't running the football. They were throwing, everything within 5 to 7 yards. They were very predictable, and their defense was getting, beat up over the season because they were on the field all the time. So losing a guy like Devin Bush, losing a guy like Bud Dupree, those are huge losses for a team that prides themselves on a physical brand of defensive football. So is Pittsburgh going to be able to kind of replicate what they did the first half of the season and come out and really establish their run game, take some shots downfield, spread out the defense a little bit more, and really try to prove to people that they are the Pittsburgh Steelers from the first half of the season? Or are they going to come out and, lay an egg and be exactly what they were the last, third of the season? I think that Mike Tomlin is such a good motivator of his team that he won't allow that to happen. And I think that from a coaching perspective, when you look at the matchup with Stefanski being out, you really have a huge advantage on the Pittsburgh side, because now you've got the master motivator, Mike Tomlin, versus a guy who's coaching his first NFL game as a head coach. That's a huge difference. So I think that's a really interesting matchup when you look at it from that perspective. And then obviously the key matchup for me, you'll probably agree with me on this one, is the battle of the quarterbacks. Who's going to take over the game? Is it going to be Ben Roethlisberger? Is it going to be Baker Mayfield? If Baker's able to get out of the pocket and start to feel comfortable getting the ball downfield, running his play action off their run game, I think Cleveland gets into a roll and a rhythm when that happens. With Ben needs to complete a few passes early on in order to get his confidence up, because trust me, being a longtime Steeler fan, when Ben is off, he is. You talk about Phillip Rivers being on the verge of retirement. Ben Roethlisberger's in the same draft class. I think that Ben is, very much in that same regard when it comes to him being off. They've got so many weapons on offense, and it's painful when you see a guy struggling that bad. Now, that being said, a lot of that has to do with his receivers dropping the football. I've never seen a team drop as many footballs as Pittsburgh does, and it's infuriating. But, when you look at it, if Pittsburgh's receivers can catch the ball, if Ben can actually, get loose nice and early, complete a few, short passes early, we can start to build up that run game. We can start to, incorporate some play action on there. So now we can stretch the field a little bit with guys like James Washington and Deontay Johnson. And, for me, we got to get Chase Claypool involved early and often, because that guy needs to be the one who takes over a game. So that's my 2 cents on the matchup between the two teams. So over to you, my friend.
Well, I mean, we'll stop the clock on that. That was quite the rant on.
Sorry, man. You knew that was gonna. You knew that was going to be long.
Yeah. But I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? first and foremost, I want to get it out there that I am taking less than nothing away from their Week 17 matchup, right? If the Steelers could have rested Mike Tomlin that game, they probably would have rested him as well too, right? So, and on the other hand, Cleveland was in that weird situation where they had to win, but they didn't want to throw the kitchen sink at them and show them all their gadget plays and the whole playbook. So they wanted to win, but win ugly because they knew there was a good chance they were probably playing Pittsburgh the next week anyways. And so Week 17 was a mess to me. I'm taking nothing away from that game. What is concerning, like you said, is here you go. You've got the Pittsburgh Steelers 11-0, and they limp into the playoffs, finish the season 1-4 over their last 5 games. And I'm calling it the Ryan Shazier curse, because when they were 11-0, he hopped on the Bill Simmons podcast and started waxing poetic about how they were going 16-0. They were winning the Super Bowl. He was inviting Bill and all the Patriots fans down to their parade, and then the wheels just fell off the bus there. So if you got anyone to blame, you can blame him for doing that. But I mean, it's going to be that classic AFC North, hard-hitting, old-school football. It's a Sunday night game. It's not going to be snowing. I checked the weather forecast. They're not calling for snow, but -3 with a lot of wind. So how many field goals are they even going to really attempt there? Probably at a minimal. So probably a lot of 4th and shorts that they'll be going for it. And, cold weather, cold hands, old quarterback. Cold hands and Deontay Johnson doesn't really, sell me on too much. He has enough trouble hanging on to the ball on a good day.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the one sort of thing that they really are missing there is that's the classic game where a Devin Bush or a Bud Dupree would really excel at, right? Because if the Cleveland Browns are going to win that game, right, Baker's going to need to pull off some magic, and Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are going to see a steady dose of touches in that game, right? So, I mean, honestly, you could tell me any score in this game and I would probably believe you, right? You could tell me that Chubb and Hunt combined for 5 touchdowns and the Browns ran away with it, wouldn't bat an eye. You could tell me that the Steelers won 38-3. All right, that doesn't faze me either. What I actually think will probably end up happening, like you say, it'll come down to sort of that playoff pedigree. And, given the fact that it is potentially Ben's last year, who knows whether he'll come back is he really going to get bounced in the first round to Cleveland? I don't see it happening. I think this is going to serve a very young Browns team well moving forward. It's going to get them those reps. It's going to get them that experience. Like you just said about Baltimore having a sour taste in their mouth. Well, this will probably leave an even more sour taste because it is that divisional rival, right? You'd be losing almost to your big brother right there. So I think this is going to serve the Browns well in the future. It's not the last time they're going to be in the playoffs under this regime there. It's a new team. They're not going to go whatever it was, 17 years without the playoffs where they had the Bud Light fridges that they were going to unlock when they won their first game, and they still had to go 3 or 4 games into the next season before they finally unlocked them. Like, times have changed. It's a different team, but I still think they're a couple pieces away. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be an ugly game. I think there's probably going to be a lot of punts. I think there's going to be multiple turnovers on both teams. And I think at the end of the day, the Pittsburgh Steelers come away with it, but it's going to be an ugly score. It's going to be like a 19-12 or something, low scoring, sort of old school vibe to it is what I sort of feel.
Yeah. And again, I think that finally we're on the same page in regards to how the game's going to go and really who's going to come out with it. I think Cleveland, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, they're going to touch the ball 40 to 50 times between the two of them. That's their bread and butter. That's how they're going to move the football down the field. From a Pittsburgh perspective, I think that you actually said it right. Ben is going to come out and he's going to try and prove the naysayers that, you know what, yes, I had a bad stretch, but I'm still Ben Roethlisberger. I've won 2 Super Bowls before. I've been to the playoffs, almost every season that I've been in the NFL, and I want to show everybody that that I can still get it done when the time comes. So I think that the game is ugly. I think that Pittsburgh does right the ship a little bit, but I think that ultimately it's going to be a 21-17 Pittsburgh victory on Sunday night.
Yeah. There you go. Took us 3 games, but we finally got there. We're on the same.
We're good.
Yeah. There we go. We're playing nicely finally. All right. Switching over to the NFC here. So we've got versus Washington up first. I'll go first on this because before I
Sure.
even start, I've got to get a little something off my chest here as an Eagles fan. So
Go right ahead.
first and foremost, did the Eagles try their best to win that game on Sunday night? 100% no. And if anyone tells you that they tried to do everything in their power to win, you're delusional. That's
Yeah.
just a full stop, non-starter for me there. That being said, right, like, let's not pretend that tanking for better draft picks is all of a sudden a new phenomenon in the year 2021 here, right? Like, this has been going on for years, and there are way more glaring examples I can think of there that have been a little bit more obvious than what happened there. But it's one thing to say, you know what, we're not going to dress all of our stars just in case of injury. It's, we're going to roll with sort of our B players, get the young kids reps, but however you want to spin it. Where I did take issue with what they did that night was you're in a close game and you yank Jalen Hurts, and now in comes Sudfeld for no reason whatsoever, right? So, yeah, if I'm a player, I'm probably a little bit pissed. If I'm, a fan of the team, I'm pissed. It's not a good look for the team. It's not a good look for the league. But what I'm more interested, and I think it'll be very telling what happens with Doug Peterson over the next couple of days here. I want to know is who made that call? Was it Doug Peterson actually, saying what he said in the press conference? Because he was going to say it no matter what. Oh, it was my decision to, wanted to get him some reps, blah, 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 blah. Or did he get a phone call from upstairs saying, like, okay, we're not risking, Chase Young mutilating Jalen Hurts here, him getting injured in a meaningless game that means absolutely nothing to us here, right? Like, let's think this through, get Sudfeld in there and sort of see where the cards fall. I think if Peterson keeps his job into next season, he got a phone call from whether it was the owner or the GM or someone and said, we're making this decision for you, right? If he arbitrarily went out there and made that decision to get Sudfeld all those reps and, now look at all the blowback on the team, he's going to get canned. So they'll probably won't find out until years and years later when he's a cranky old man and he releases a memoir or something what really happened in that game. But I think it'll be very telling in the next couple of days what sort of happens there. And that'll sort of show you where they went, right? And the second thing, before I even get to the matchup here, is to all the Giants fans and even the Giants players who are just whining and waxing poetic on social media and here, like, let's not pretend that this is the greatest injustice that has ever happened in NFL history, that your 6-10 team didn't make the playoffs, right? Like, if you really wanted to make the playoffs, how about you win some more games? Yeah. Right? That's a pretty open and shut one for me there. But even more so than that, you look at who they actually beat, right? All NFC East teams, the Bengals the week after they just lost Joe Burrow, right? So how many snaps did, God knows who they even trotted out there. Was it Allen at that point? I don't even know. And then the Seahawks. So you got one decent win on the entire year, and you guys are acting like it is a crime against humanity that you are not in the playoffs. Give me a break.
Well, that was fantastic. I just want to say, not even involved in the playoff matchup, but first we start off with a conspiracy theory, which I absolutely and again, it gives you something to think about because that's not that far-fetched to really put in place that if for some reason he gets fired, it's him that made the decision because he's lost a lot of players on that team based on that decision. So if he did that, that takes some gumption to make that choice if you know that you're going to lose that team. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out. And I mean, from the Giants' perspective, I totally agree with you. I mean, anytime that you can't go 9-7, you can't complain that you didn't make the playoffs. The Miami Dolphins are sitting at home as a 10-6 team right now.
Yeah,
and they have a bigger gripe than anybody because, or I shouldn't say that. They ultimately controlled their destiny much more than a lot of these other teams did. So when you look at it from the Giants, the Reds, I almost said it, the football team, the Eagles, and and the Cowboys, it seemed to me like nobody actually wanted to win that division because even with Philadelphia trying their absolute best to not win the football game. Washington didn't beat them by that much.
No.
So, I mean, when you look at, the Washington team, the thing that you can really kind of revolve around is the Alex Smith story. That's just such a great story through and through. Ron Rivera going through cancer treatment this year. There's so much to rally around that team for that, you can really get behind a team like Washington to win the division. But at the end of the day, none of the four teams really stood out and saying, hey, you know what, we're going to take the bull by the horns and we're going to win this one. It's like, oh, if Philadelphia wins this one game, then they clinch the spot and they lose 2 in a row. Yeah. Well, if Dallas wins, then they're going to clinch and Dallas loses. If the Giants win, they're like, it seemed like every time a team had a chance to take a step forward in that division, they took 3 back.
Yeah.
So again, no one should be beating themselves up. No one should be criticizing other teams. No one should be, saying anything in that regard, because again, you're 6-10, you're 7-9. You have no business even being in the playoffs. So just take your lumps, regroup, come back next year, and off you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now that we're actually talking about the game coming up here, now that we've come full circle to Washington against Tampa here, it is such a good story with Alex Smith, but I fear for his life this weekend. I genuinely think,
to put it lightly,
it's going to be ugly, right? You just said it, and I've got it here in my notes, right? What got exposed glaringly in that game against a team that was at best feigning an attempt to try and win the game, and didn't even have their 2 best pass rushers in Cox or Barnett even dressed for it. And they've got a gaping hole at the linebacker position. So to say that they have a dominating pass rush is laughable here. They had Smith scrambling for his life. And the playbook is pretty simple for Tampa. It's overload one side, force him out of the pocket to move laterally, and he's done, right? He's too close to returning from the injury to still have his full strength back. He's not going to be able to scramble like he used to back with San Francisco. He's not going to be able to make those accurate on the run throws. And I think he is going to be running for his life. When you compare the, Devin Whites, the Levante Davids, those monsters they have on the defensive line, they're going to be getting to him early and often, to the point where you might see Washington pretty quickly have both a running back and a fullback out there with no intention of running the ball, but just simply picking up blitzes just to give themselves a chance to actually get some passes off there. I mean, I like some of the pieces that Washington actually has. I like McLaurin. I like Gibson. I like the converted tight end quarterback there, Logan Thomas there. I like some of the pieces that they've got on offense, but are they going to be able to even get them the ball in space when Smith is going to be scrambling for his life? Because you can guarantee all Tampa is doing is just watching the film from week 17 and being like, all right, this is the gap that we're going to expose. This is how we're, going to bring the house on this play and look at his tendencies. And right. So it's really tough to think that this is going to be a close game. After all of this, if I was to now say that, I think Washington's going to win, it would be the 180 of the century. But I think it's going to be Tampa. I think they're going to cover the spread. I think you take the over. I think you take every option possible. This is my lock of the weekend. This is the one game I think has less than 0% chance of being close. If Washington somehow pulls off a miracle win here, our listeners can write in. I'll do some sort of embarrassing thing on air. But I just do not see a path for, I almost said their name again, the Washington football teams to actually come out on top here.
Let's just say Washington.
Yeah, just Washington in general there. But the only thing I'm really going to be watching this weekend, because I sort of know it's a foregone conclusion in my head, is what role, if any, is Mike Evans going to play in it, right? Just had the record-setting catch, and literally the next play goes down with a knee injury. Now, they just got some good news today. MRIs came back clean. He's day-to-day. I think, especially given the fact that it's their first playoff appearance in like 13 years or something here, and he's been a lifer, he's going to be hell-bent to play. I think they get out to an early lead and they just park him on the bench and, save it for next round type thing. But I'm going to be sort of interested in seeing how well he is moving in that limited amount of play that he does have out there. Is he limping? Is he, a step slower? How really close to 100% is he? And
Yeah.
aside from that, I think it'll be a kickoff, and aside from that, that'll probably be the closest that the score will be all day.
All right. Well, I mean, it's very difficult to go against everything you're saying because you're really, I think everybody who's watching football this weekend is thinking the same thing. And from a Tampa Bay perspective, they were kind of everybody's dark horse pick at the start of the season to make a run in the playoffs and possibly be a Super Bowl team. And what better way to start your run at a Super Bowl than to get matched up with a team who's not one at 100% and two is from the worst division in football. So I agree with you. I think that the Mike Evans news is, although it's really good that he's back and he is considered day to day and it's not as bad as people thought. Really understanding how to how much to push him in this game, because yes, although he probably wants to suit up for this game, although he probably wants to get out in the field, you don't want to risk something if the game is on the line.
Mhm.
So at the end of the day, I'm looking at it from, this is the best stretch of football Tom Brady's played in the last 5 years. And, realistically, you could argue that, he's really emulating the brand of football he was playing back when, they went 16-0. Just with how well he's been pushing the ball down the field the last few weeks, just with how well he's spreading the ball around the last few weeks. It wasn't always like that this season. Obviously, there were some tumultuous times where, he was struggling with the playbook a little bit. His receivers and him were on the same page. Bruce Arians and him were on the same page. Now you're looking at it and everything seems to be coming together. Just like I was mentioning with Baltimore, everything seems to be coming together for Tampa Bay at the right time. And when you look at everything that they have, this is a rejuvenated Tom Brady. The guy's been there, he's done that. He could retire. He could have retired 5-6 years ago and been a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now he's just adding this on. And I think that with New England failing to make the playoffs, he's really going to be on a mission to prove to people that I don't need the Patriots. I don't need Bill Belichick to win. I can do this on my own because, again, even though I'm not a fan, I have to give the guy respect. He's done everything that you can do as a player. And realistically, again, I'll give him props. This is the best football I've seen him play in a long, long time. And you look at the backfield that Tampa Bay offers with Jones and Fournette. You look at the receivers that they have other than Mike Evans. You have Godwin. You've got Gronk. You've got Cameron Brate. Like you've got a lot of good, solid players on that roster that. And and I'm not even mentioning Antonio Brown, but you look at all of the people, all the people that Tampa Bay has on that offense, and they can put up a lot of points in a hurry.
Yeah.
And again, Washington, they have youth on their side. It's one of those teams where you're mentioning with Cleveland, this is a good experience for this group of players to get into right away. You look at the potential that they have long term. This team has potential to be a very, very good team for a long time. They're well coached. That defensive line is going to be absolutely something in the next 3 or 4 years if they all stay together. They've got some nice young pieces on offense, but it's just not going to be enough when you look at everything that Tampa Bay has to offer. Personally, I think that Tampa Bay has the most well-rounded coaching staff in the league. When you look at it from a defense perspective, Todd Bowles is one of the best innovative, defensive coordinators in the league.
Mm-hmm.
He will bring pressure from everywhere. He will, put, guys in matchups that will create those mismatches that you really need, to exploit, weaker players or schemes or what have you. And then again, if I'm looking at, Bruce Arians, the guy's won Super Bowls as an offensive coordinator. The guy's taken teams from, the depths of nowhere, like when he was the interim head coach in Indianapolis, when he took over in Arizona. He brought those teams along as far as he could bring them because he is a terrific football coach. When you match terrific football coaching with terrific football players, good things happen. Weird.
Yeah.
Weird how that happens.
That's a hot take right there.
Yeah, it's a hot take. But again, it's the simplest statement you can make. But Tampa Bay versus Washington, there's really nothing that stands out as Washington is going to win this brand of, win this game within the game.
Yeah.
So again, I think that this is going to be a very lopsided score. Now, am I going to say it's going to be 50-0? No. But I think that Washington puts up a good fight as much as they can because, everything that, that they can rally around, like Alex Smith, Ron Rivera, what have you. But again, Tampa Bay's got too many weapons. I'm going to say 38-10.
Oh, we're very close. I have 38-14. Look at us. Adorable. So all of that to say is it's not going to be close, and Giants fans, stop whining.
Yeah.
All right, Bears and Saints. Who are you liking in this one?
All right. So on the surface, you look at the things that both of these teams do well. New Orleans defense is really cruising right now. Yes, they had that performance on Christmas Day where Minnesota was putting up points against them, but their offense was cruising to a point where I think the defense kind of took a step back and they really just kind of reorganized themselves. But their defense has really impressed me the last little while. They're really playing with a lot of fire. A lot of their guys are taking the next step up. You look at a guy like Davenport, who they invested a lot in on the edge a few years ago. He's really starting to take that next step to be that dominant pass rusher that they need. Cam Jordan is as steady as they come on the defensive line. They've got a great leader in Demario Davis. Their secondary starting to put it all together. So ultimately, I think their defense is really what's going to drive them in this game. And from a Chicago perspective, I think that's what Chicago's really made their hay on the last 5, 6, 30 years. Chicago's never really had that dominant offense, even though they have been putting up a lot of points recently. I think that in order for Chicago to win this game, they need to start getting pressure on Drew Brees. So Khalil Mack, I think if you were to ask any Bears fan, other than that first year that they acquired him, he's really been disappointing based on his performance the last couple of years. I think that in order for that defense to take that next step forward and to really push the Saints, I think they need a guy like Khalil Mack to really take over that game and force New Orleans offense to scheme around him, so that way it opens up gaps for other players. But the one thing that comes to mind when I'm looking at the matchup between the two of them is how healthy are the Saints going to be going into this game? You obviously had their whole entire running back core out for the last regular season game with COVID, and they haven't cleared any of those running backs as I look through the news right now. But that's going to be a huge factor for them. And then on top of that, is Michael Thomas coming back? They put him on IR 3 weeks ago. He was supposed to come back for the playoffs, but again, no news on whether he's going to be coming back or not. You take out Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray, and Michael Thomas out of that Saints offense, I don't care how good you are across the board. That's a lot of talent that you're taking off that team. So that's obviously going to play a huge factor in how successful the Saints are actually going to be. Now, that being said, they still have Drew Brees. They've got a weapon like Taysom Hill. Emmanuel Sanders has been a really good addition for them. Jared Cook's playing at a very high level right now. They've got a really good offensive line. The Saints have enough talent to get by, but I don't think that they just want to get by. They want to be at full strength, because if any team's been snake bitten in the playoffs the last 10 years, the New Orleans Saints are the poster child for being snake bitten in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I think they want to get over that hump, and I think they want to be at full strength when they do it, because you look at what they've done against teams when they're at full strength, they're a pretty scary team. When their defense is cooking and their offense is rolling like they have been, this is a team that can win games by 30 to 40 points if they put it all together. Sean Payton's been through it, time and time again. Again, one of the better coaches in the league. It's no surprise that a lot of these guys who are in the playoffs are the better coaches in the league. And then when you look at it from a Bears perspective, I just don't see enough on the Bears offense that really excites me to a point of, yeah, they're going to be able to put up 30 or 40 points against the Saints defense, because that's what they're ultimately going to need, whether these Saints players are healthy or not. I think that Chicago has some nice pieces, like we were just talking about with Washington. I love David Montgomery. I think that he is one of the most underrated running backs in the league. Mitchell Trubisky is as topsy-turvy as you can get at quarterback. But, again, he shows a tendency to, and he shows flashes of being that, second overall pick that he was once. But, again, that all depends on the run game. How well are they going to be able to establish the run and get Mitchell Trubisky out of the pocket where he feels comfortable? Get him on bootlegs, get him on play actions. When I look at it from a total perspective, there's not a lot of speed in the Washington receiving corps. And that ultimately is what's been their demise in the games that they've lost. Is Allen Robinson isn't a burner. fantastic route runner, big body, catches, every pass that's thrown his way. But who do they have to stretch the field?
Mhm.
Right? They've got the young kid Mooney. He's got a little bit of jam to him. But I don't see that, take the top off the defense type guy on Chicago that can really, separate them from these top level teams. And I think that their success is ultimately going to be how well they establish, David Montgomery in that run game, because then that opens up their whole playbook for Mitchell Trubisky to work with their tight ends and with their big receivers.
Yeah. Yeah. So clearly you got an advanced copy of my notes here, because you essentially verbatim put out exactly what I had written down as well too. I mean, who would have thought, after all the drama going back and forth between Trubisky and Foles here, that we would be sitting even talking about Mitch Trubisky, playoff quarterback at this time of year? But
Yep.
Here we are. And, I really don't think that they're isolated events, that once the Bears got back to an emphasis on feeding the ball to David Montgomery and him reestablishing the run, that all of a sudden Mitch Trubisky started having some on-field success there, right? They go hand in hand. So the only way that the Bears are going to be able to even keep this one tight is they're going to need to establish the run early and often. They're going to have a good balance, because if you are relying on Trubisky to throw 45 passes and try and, airmail a victory to you, best of luck to you. But I don't see it happening, right? And, at the end of the day, it really is kind of a weird thing to be talking about, that it's the Saints defense that is doing so many things to win them games, when for years it's been, all right, we got a track meet here. We got to put up 45 points because our defense is going to give up 38. And, they were just Swiss cheese out there. So the fact that they are so solid across the board, whether it's at the line, their corners, their secondary, everything, they don't have that weak spot that teams can sort of key in on and exploit for big plays or those points, right? And all you have to do is just look at their 2 games against Tampa this year, and all the offensive weapons that Tampa had. Granted, it was a little bit earlier on in the season and they were still sort of in a bit of a funk there, but the talent levels were still there. And they didn't even look like they were, it was almost like an NFL team playing an NFL Europe team or something like that. They didn't even look like they were in the same field. But how healthy are they? Again, like you said, Michael Thomas hasn't been cleared yet. There's reports that he's leaning towards playing and he should suit up and blah, 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 blah. So, hopefully the Saints are optimistic that Kamara will get cleared and whatnot. But I mean, if you're going into that game with, Ty Montgomery and Taysom Hill as your only 2 real running options, not a great look. They can probably still win the game, doing some other things and maybe, getting a little bit funky with some of the play calls there. But you'd like to have your running back who is fresh off tying the NFL record for single game touchdowns, right? To me, if the Saints are able to just blanket coverage Allen Robinson, I think that's your game plan right there, because he is the one true difference maker on offense, right? They do have some nice pieces, right? You've got, Cole Kmet, you've got an aging Jimmy Graham, who's probably not going to catch you too many balls that are going to stretch the field, but get into the red zone and you still jump pretty high. And then, Mooney, the rookie there. But if you're having to rely on those 3 to really move the chains when it counts, it's going to be tough, right? So, I think the Bears are going to have to come up with a game plan that is going to allow Allen Robinson to get some of those one-on-one matchups, right? And whether that's, getting a little bit creative with the play calls, or, the Saints just committing to that one-on-one matchup and saying, whether it's, Lattimore or whoever they put on him, and just saying, let's run with it. Almost anytime you get one-on-one, take a shot, right? Because he's the one person that is possibly going to move that needle. Again, David Montgomery is going to probably have to touch the ball at least 20, 25 times that game if he's going to get sort of the production out of him that they need to pull off a victory. But again, the Bears are going to need to play a near perfect game in all 3 aspects, whether it's offense, defense, or special teams, if they're going to win this game. All it'll take is one turnover at the wrong time, and like you say, the Saints are putting up a touchdown, and then they get a defensive stop, a quick 3 and out, right? And they get the ball back, and now they're all of a sudden there's a 14-point swing. Like, that's how quickly it can happen when you're playing against New Orleans there. I just don't see too many ways that the Bears will win this game. I think it's going to be closer than people think, just because, I don't know, I've got sort of that weird feeling that the Bears are going to be a little bit frisky in the game. At the end of the day, though, I still think New Orleans wins and, maybe even wins comfortably on the scoreboard at the end of it, but the game will be played a lot tighter all throughout. And even if they do win by a 2-score game, it's going to have felt a lot closer all the way throughout.
Yeah. And again, I think that what you have to take into account as well is New Orleans is a very tough team to play at home, regardless if they have fans or not. It's indoors, it's turf. They are a fast team. They're a passing team. Passing teams excel indoors on turf.
Mhm.
Running teams excel outdoors in the cold in the playoffs. So if this game's in Chicago, I say that it's a completely different atmosphere, a completely different outcome of the game. Now, you take that in consideration to New Orleans. Again, like you're saying, I don't see many ways that Chicago can win this game. So I think that if all those guys that we mentioned before are in the game, I think that it's 42-10 for New Orleans. If we take out those pieces on offense that can really make the difference, I think we're looking more of like a 31-17 type game.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our final matchup of this weekend here, because obviously we've got the Chiefs and Packers watching from the comfort of their own homes. So we got Rams versus Seahawks. So before we even get into the nitty gritty of this here, let's go through, because Jared Goff obviously questionable to play, whether he can suit up or not with that surgically repaired thumb. Yep. Let's go back to the 2016 NFL draft here, and I just want to read you off the laundry list of quarterbacks that came out of that entire draft, right? So in order that they went, you got Goff, Wentz, Paxton Lynch in the first round, then Hackenberg, Brissett, Kessler, Cook, Dak Prescott in the fourth, Cardale Jones, Kevin Hogan, Nate Sudfeld, Jake Ruddock, Brandon Allen, Jeff Driscoll, and then Brandon Doughty. If you were to today pick one of those quarterbacks and they had to be the quarterback of your favorite team for the next 5 years, who would you pick?
Well, first of all, that list is absolutely awful when you look at the whole, when you look at the variety of it. My God. I would have to go Dak Prescott.
Yeah.
I think that Dak just brings the element that none of those other quarterbacks bring, which is, I can take over a game however I need to. He can run, he can throw, he's smart. And I think you saw that with Dallas this year, how much of a step they took backwards when he went down. And you look at the only other two quarterbacks who would be in that conversation, which are Goff and Wentz. Jared Goff, I think, has been overrated his entire career. And I think he's been a benefactor of being involved in a very good system, surrounded by a lot of talent.
Mm-hmm.
He's still good. He can still make the throws that you need him to, and he'll win you football games. But if we're looking at his production, I just don't see how Jared Goff brings the team back down by 20 points. Yeah. I'm not confident in that. Carson Wentz, I think we've talked about him. You being an Eagles fan, you've gone through your struggles with Carson Wentz already.
I'm still PTSD from the Carson Wentz experience here this season. So.
Yeah. Phenomenal talent, but when is he going to be that phenomenal talent? That has been the most frustrating part of Carson Wentz. We talked about it the other day when we were texting. He's been out for the last 3 weeks of the season. He still leads the league in turnovers.
Yeah.
And again, it's the injury issues with him, right? If he plays a 16-game schedule, I think that everybody's kind of saying like, okay, well, when's he going to break down in the playoffs? Like you saw a couple of years ago against Seattle.
Yeah.
So all in all, Dak Prescott has shown me enough that he can really be that guy that I would absolutely be confident in running my team for the next 5 years.
Yeah. The only thing that scares me is obviously, how well is he going to come back being such a mobile quarterback after that gruesome injury he had this year. But when you're going down the list here, even as a diehard Eagles fan, like I still have to even go with Dak Prescott here. I love the fact that for years it was always, Wentz or Dak, who's the best person? And now it's here's the guy who went down in week 5 or something like that. And by virtue of him not even playing and just people watching Carson Wentz ended that argument on his own and not for the right reasons. Everyone went with Dak here. So it's 2016 NFL draft not going to go down as the quarterback factory draft. That is for sure. getting back to the matchup, I mean, again, toss up divisional game, anything can happen, especially in the NFC West, where for whatever reason, even in the years where, San Francisco was going on their big runs to the Super Bowl and all of that, and then they would play like the 3-10 Cardinals, and all of a sudden it's coming down to a last second field goal. Something about that division. They always play tight no matter what, regardless of who's on the field, regardless of the record, whatever. It's always tight games. It's going to sound cliche, but to me, everything comes down to the line of scrimmage in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Is Seattle going to be able to handle Aaron Donald, right? Or is he going to be causing all sorts of trouble? Is Seattle going to be able to even put any pressure on whoever is at quarterback for the Rams, whether it is, John Wolford, or if it's, an injured Jared Goff? What is that going to look like? Is the Rams offensive line going to be able to open up the holes and the gaps that they need to get a Cam Akers or whoever happens to be having the hot hand of that game going? I don't know, right? You look at Cam Akers, talk about a Jekyll and Hyde player over the last couple of weeks. You go back 2-3 weeks ago against the Patriots, he's 171 yards. And then just this last weekend, he had 34 yards on 21 touches, right? Now, granted, when you've got John Wolford at quarterback, sure, the Cardinals are selling out against the run, but I mean, you'd hope that he could do better than just to fall forward for a yard at best, right? So at the end of the day, every strength that one of the teams has, the other sort of has something to counterbalance it, right? So, Seattle isn't able to generate a lot of pass rush off their defensive line. So that's why Jamal Adams isn't really playing safety. He's just blitzing every single play, right? So they manufacture it that way. DK Metcalf, all-world talent. You never want to get him open. Well, you've got a Jalen Ramsey who can sort of help mitigate the damage. He's still going to get his catches and whatnot, but is he going to go off for 200 yards? Well, probably not, right? But I think it might even come down to something as simple as this. Regardless of who's quarterback, if it's Wolford, forget it. I'm going Seattle all day. If it's Jared Goff, though, it's in Seattle. It's cold weather. It's coming back early from an injury to your thumb. That's kind of an important part of being a quarterback there. So your hands are going to be cold. I just sort of see it being one of those games where, because he's not able to grip the ball as tight, maybe we see 1 or 2 picks that had no business being picks, that he just loses the grip on the ball, or he gets strip sacked from behind and fumbles at the wrong time. And then Seattle goes down and capitalizes on those opportunities. And I think that's going to be the real turning point in the game, unless the Rams are able to open those gaps and turn it into a run fest, because they know that, well, we've got maybe 20 to 25 good throws out of Goff, and if he has to put up 40, we're doomed here. So I see it being tight, but I think Seattle wins just based on sort of that playoff pedigree and having been there, gotten it done, and just being a little bit healthier than the Rams at this point.
If the Rams are going to win this football game, it has to be through their defense.
Mm-hmm.
That, regardless of Jared Goff is in or not, they will not win this game unless their defense scores points.
Yeah.
Or puts their offense in a position to score points. Going to the matchup between, I love how, you made a point of, it all starts up front. And people can say it's cliche all they want. It's the truth. When you play football, the game is dictated on the front lines, offensive and defensive line. Whoever wins that battle, that's who's going to win that football game 99 times out of 100. You might get the odd fluke game where, again, you're fumbling the football, you're turning the ball over, and, anything can happen. But 99 times out of 100, whoever wins the battle up front is going to win the football game. The one thing that the Rams do very well is get after the quarterback. Mm-hmm. They've got a fearsome front four led by the best defensive player in football. Many would argue that the second best defensive player in football is also in their secondary, Jalen Ramsey. So, again, you look at what they can do well. It's one, take away a half of the field with Jalen Ramsey, and two, they can create pressure up the middle, which not a lot of teams can do. And if you look at Russell Wilson, he has a tendency to take a lot of sacks because he obviously wants to get the ball to an open receiver, and he will take as much time as he can by moving the pocket, by rolling out, by buying himself time. But that ultimately ends up, being a hindrance for him a lot of times. So when I look at how the Rams can really affect what Seattle does, it's exactly what they do well. Get pressure up the middle with Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers. Those two guys can get pressure up the middle to force Russ back and forth. If I am their defensive coordinator, I am telling my defensive ends, do not get washed up field. Hold the integrity of the pocket, force Russell Wilson to move towards you. Because once Russ steps up and then rolls out of the pocket, that is when he is at his absolute most dangerous. Take away the run, or take away his running ability by creating that pressure up the middle. Aaron Donald's going to get pressure. Everybody knows that, whether he's double team, triple team, whatever. But if I'm their defensive ends, I'm holding fort on the outside. I'm keeping Russell Wilson in the pocket. So that way he has to run in towards Aaron Donald, or he's got to roll out running 5-6 yards backwards. And that's where you want him to be. Now, when I look at it from a Seattle perspective, I think that they really have turned a corner in regards to rushing the passer since they acquired Carlos Dunlap from Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
He has been a difference maker for them, and he's really opened up a lot of what they do on defense. And when you add someone like that into the mix, he can really change a game. And you've seen that with Seattle in the past when they've gotten a guy like Michael Bennett, when they've gotten a guy like Ziggy Ansah. These are guys who can come in and, even if it's just one or two plays, they're big plays in a game. So when you incorporate that guy into the defense, along with, a playmaker like Jamal Adams, along with a middle linebacker like Bobby Wagner, now you're starting to get a good mix of players on a defense that has always been renowned for being fearsome. And they're starting to get a little bit more of that swagger back now. Because again, at the start of the season, you watch that football team, it's like, oh my God, they're giving up 40 points to everybody.
Yeah.
Now they're starting to tighten up the screws a little bit. They're getting after the quarterback. They're forcing more turnovers, and they're really starting to look like, the old style, Seattle defense. And, going towards, the offensive side, when you look at what Seattle does well, again, what their offensive coordinator likes to call, what Russ likes to do, they like to run the football. Because what does that do for Russ? It opens up the entire field and the entire playbook for him. Russ excels when he is moving outside of the pocket on play action. It sounds like a recurring theme of what we're talking about, but this is the reality of what quarterbacks are good at nowadays. If you have a full healthy backfield, which Seattle does, Carson is back healthy, Penny is back healthy. They've got a couple of those young kids that are in there as well. Now you can really start to open up your playbook a little bit more. And now it really opens up what DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are able to do. So if I'm Brian Schottenheimer, the offensive coordinator of Seattle, I'm not afraid to take a chance down the field with DK Metcalf versus Jalen Ramsey, because ultimately I'm going to trust my 6'4", 235-pound receiver, who is probably the biggest deep threat in the game today. As good as Jalen Ramsey is, you can't be afraid to take shots, because what does that do? Well, now the safety is going to creep a little bit further back there now. And what happens when the safety creeps back? The middle of the field opens up. If the middle of the field opens up, that's where Tyler Lockett's just going to absolutely destroy you. So you need to play that game a little bit more, even if DK is just a decoy. Throw 3 or 4 passes down the field. Even if Jalen Ramsey knows it's coming, what is it going to hurt to throw it up and have your guy, be better at football than the other guy? Right? That's what you have to do, ultimately. So I think with everything that, we've kind of talked about back and forth, I really don't see any way that the Rams win the game unless their defense, scores once or twice. And they're going to have to play out of their mind to score once or twice, because I think Seattle is going to be very, very well prepared for this game. And I think that Seattle's defense is going to be very confident, regardless of which quarterback is in the game, to take advantage of what they're doing. So, I mean, from a coaching perspective, Pete Carroll, he's been there, done that. Sean McVay, everybody likes to call him the Wunderkind, and he's this. The thing that Sean McVay does to himself, I think he outcoaches himself in really tight games, which is a common thing for young coaches, even old coaches. I think regardless of what happens, he needs to simplify what he's calling and what they're really doing, and just trust his players to go make plays. Bottom line.
Yeah.
Because if he starts getting too fancy with it, he'll outcoach himself, and that's when disaster happens and you don't score any points.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think that overall, I like Seattle, and I like Seattle, 28-13.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? Maybe it is going to be a blessing in disguise if it's a somewhat wounded Jared Goff that hops out there, because maybe it limits the playbook, and like you say, he doesn't get too fancy and try and do anything out of this world, and just keep it simple. And right, who knows? Maybe Jared Goff has a Kurt Schilling bloody sock game in him there or something up his sleeve. But
Bloody thumb.
yeah. Well, look at that. We started on opposite pages for the first two, and then we ended up fairly similar to end it all out there. So not too bad. I mean, the real question too is, regardless of where the game is being played, how much of an advantage is home field advantage this year, given the fact that some stadiums it's no fans, some it's extremely limited capacity, like we said at the top of the show there. I think Buffalo's got like 7,000 Bills Mafia fans coming in a stadium of how many tens of thousands there. So it's definitely not going to be the same atmosphere in years past. How do you see it sort of playing out this year?
Yeah, home field advantage is always an advantage, regardless of what scenario you're put in. Taking out the COVID aspect of where we are in the world, home field is always key for everybody involved in the home team. So you look at coaches, players, personnel, everyone's sleeping in their own bed. They're around their family. Everybody's happy. The routine doesn't change. They go to the field. It's comfortable there. They've established themselves in the locker room. The locker room's comfortable. The smell of the stadium is comforting for people. They might go out in the field and there's a certain spot on the field that they like to go to all the time. And that's, part of their pregame tradition. They look at something on the scoreboard. They find something during the game that, really takes their nerves away. Being on your own sideline, believe it or not, is a very big advantage, because where everything is. Where things are going to be set up, regardless of how, many people you have setting it up for you away. Where everything is when you're at home. I'm not going to bump my knee on a bench that, it might be 6 inches further forward than it is at home. I know where everything is. I can walk around with a blindfold on and know where things are. So, I mean, those types of things are so big in situations like this. And guys are so superstitious that any little thing that you can put in front of them that gives them that mental advantage, that's going to give them that advantage, regardless if there's fans in the stadium or not. And again, you look at from a weather perspective, weather is weather. That's going to be a huge factor for a lot of teams. Would you feel more comfortable taking Green Bay or Tampa Bay if the game's in Green Bay?
Oh, it's Green Bay 100% of the time.
Exactly, because Green Bay knows how to play in cold weather. They're accustomed to it. They do it every single week. So those are always factors that come into play when it comes to, matchups. When you look at it from a COVID perspective, how strict are the protocols for the home team versus how strict are the protocols for the away team coming in? Right? So when you look at everything that, players, coaches, personnel have to go through, I would much rather be a player at home, coach at home, personnel at home. I go to the stadium, I get my temperature, I take a test, a day or two before the game to see if I'm positive or negative. If I'm coming from out of town, you got to do it at the airport, going there. You got to do it at the airport once you land. You got to do it at the hotel that you're staying at. You got to do it at the facility when you get to the facility. There's so much more that goes into it that, again, you don't take into account because no one is used to doing this other than, people in 2020. So just something like that alone, that would upset a lot of people that they have to go through such a strict protocol when it comes to testing, even more so than being at home. So, throwing that into the equation, there's a huge advantage to being at home.
Yeah. And for all the reasons you just said and more, I think this year, especially given the fact that, that there aren't the thundering roars of fans and all that, and can't hear the audibles at the line of scrimmage and all that fun stuff, I think you'll probably see some interesting Vegas betting lines in terms of you're not going to get the typical, 3-point bump for being the home team regardless, and so you might see some skewed gambling lines. But at the end of the day, I really don't think it's going to change too much. Maybe a point here, a point there, where, like you were saying, you'll really start seeing that home field advantage, even if you are the most comfortable team in the world traveling on the road and you've got the greatest setup tear down staff and hotel booker or whatever you have. Is the fact that there are going to be three teams that I think will really have an advantage, given the fact that, number one, they're high seeds, and number two, they're cold weather teams. And that is Green Bay, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh, right? Because that unless there's some real wonky stuff that goes on, the road to the Super Bowl sort of goes through you until the conference championship or whatever, right? And in Green Bay's case, the road goes through you, full stop, right? And though, like you said, those teams are used to playing in that weather. I can only imagine if it shakes out to be a, New Orleans Green Bay conference championship, or even in a second round matchup, depending on how things go. Would you rather take a rested Green Bay team, regardless of whether it's snowing or just -5, or Drew Brees with all sorts of cracked and bruised ribs, and he's, in the last year, and I can only imagine he plays another year. I think it was him and Tom Brady were just having a pissing contest for a little while, who was going to retire first, because they just kept breaking each other's records. And I think Brees has finally realized that Brady's a sociopath and won't quit until he wins. So I think he's finally realized this is probably his last year, but I can't even imagine the advantage that an Aaron Rodgers would have over this year's Drew Brees in Lambeau in late January.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, kind of segueing over to, who the favorites would be. I mean, obviously you kind of hit on, the cold weather teams having that advantage. I mean, it's so easy to go with the defending champion and say, well, Kansas City's the obvious choice. They've got everybody coming back. They've added some weapons like a Le'Veon Bell and to really make everything that they do, that much more scary and potent. But
it turns out they'll actually really need this year, based
on
Clyde Edwards-Helaire,
sure.
Having the weirdest splits ever and just
yeah. But as hard as it is to say it, I have to go against Kansas City being the favorite. I have to go with Green Bay being the Super Bowl favorite right now. The way that Aaron Rodgers has played this season has been eerily reminiscent of the greatest quarterback performances that I think a lot of people in our generation have seen. And we've been kind of spoiled. We've seen, the Patrick Mahomes record-setting season. We've seen the Peyton Manning record-setting season. We've seen the Brady and Brees going back and forth. What Aaron Rodgers is doing this year, I don't think people give him full credit for it. It has been absolutely amazing. And he's playing the best football of his career at 37 years old, which is, again, unheard of. We talk about Tom Brady looking, better than he has in the last 5 years. This is the best Aaron Rodgers has looked in 15 years since he's entered the NFL. So you look at everything that they offer. Their defense is playing very well at the moment. Their run game is going with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Who can cover Devontae Adams?
It takes two people, apparently, because he's still going to get his friggin' numbers every single game.
But even if you do that, even if you try to bracket him and take him away, he's still going to, even if he's not catching 150 yards, he's still going to get 2 or 3 touchdowns on you. Like, that's just the way that Green Bay mixes it up. And, that's the one thing that I think Green Bay kind of looks forward to more than other teams is when they get inside the 5, it's not just run, and then, it's 4th down, we have to throw it. Green Bay is going to throw it, and then they're going to throw it, and then when you're backed off, they're going to run it.
Oh, trust me, as an Aaron Jones owner in fantasy football this year, it drove me absolutely insane. How many plays from the 3-yard line and it's first down, and it's now we're going to check it up to Adams, or, Tanyan or whatever. But it literally was the Aaron Rodgers FU tour for not giving him any more weapons and drafting a quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, all that said, it's so hard to go against Green Bay knowing that they have the best player in the NFL, the MVP this year. They're going to be playing at home until the Super Bowl. It's so hard to go against that team. The one thing that does hurt them is losing David Bakhtiari is massive. That guy is such a phenomenal football player and so good at what he does. It takes a lot away from what, the Packers really do. But again, you saw last week, even without Bakhtiari, they didn't miss a beat because they're shifting protections. They're chipping with their running backs. They're setting up a tight end over top to help out their left tackle. Like those are the things that good teams and ultimately great teams do, is when they lose one of their top, 3 or 4 players, they don't miss a beat and they can step in and do that. So, and we talked about the Saints, overcoming what they have for injuries. This one, I think, goes a little bit under the radar because people don't really pay attention to the offensive line. It's like, oh yeah, whatever. They just fill in with another guy. You don't understand the difference in the gap between a guy like a David Bakhtiari and, maybe a second-year player who was a 4th or 5th round pick the year before.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a big gap, and that affects the game wholeheartedly. But even with all that, Green Bay is my favorite for the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah. Well, in this year, it really is looking like, and people were even saying it after week 8, week 9. Oh, it's probably going to be a Kansas City Green Bay Super Bowl, and it probably is, right? Especially in the NFC. I really don't see too many teams that are going to be able to go into Lambeau and beat this team. If Green Bay had this exact same team performing at this exact same clip, but Tampa was the number 1 seed or something, and they had to go down to Florida to play that game, I think there's an outside chance they don't make it. But Lambeau, late January, that's a very, very tough place to play. And
Yeah.
I don't see any of the teams that are in the NFC being able to dethrone them there. If someone can do it, kudos to you. You sure as hell earned your ticket to the Super Bowl this year, right? It definitely wasn't a fluke. On the AFC side, I mean, the easy pick is Kansas City, but you know what? I can't be easy. So the team I picked at the beginning of the year was the Titans. You don't even think they're making it past the first round. So you're probably going to disagree. But I'm going to die on that sword. I picked them preseason to come out of the AFC, so I'll stick with them. I think it's going to be a tough battle for them to get there. But again, looking at the AFC even, I kind of think that they're the one sort of team that could give Kansas City some fits in the simple regard of Derrick Henry is going to get the ball 8 or 9 times from his own 25-yard line till when he eventually scores a touchdown. And how much time is that taking off the clock and thereby keeping Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and all those weapons off the field too?
Yeah.
So again, if I had a gun to my head and I had to bet my mortgage or my firstborn on it, I'd probably take Kansas City. But at the end of the day, I'll stick with my preseason pick, and I'll go with the Titans Green Bay Super Bowl there.
Fair enough.
Opposite side of the coin, who are you most disappointed with this? and in talking with you earlier, I feel like I know where you're going with this one, but I'll give you the floor here.
Yeah.
Who is your big loser of 2020?
So first of all, I just want to see how good you are. Without going into it, just one word. Who do you think I'm going to go with?
I think it's going to be Jets, Jets.
No.
Wow. After the rant you went on the other day. Okay. All right. Who you got for me here?
The most disappointing team to not make the playoffs is the Dallas Cowboys, and it is not even close.
Oh, hit me up with it here.
Well, again, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier with division in the NFC East being the way that it was this year. The Cowboys had literally everything in front of them with a backup quarterback, starting quarterback, whoever was in there to run the table in the NFC East. All they had to do was beat their divisional opponents. You know what their record was in their division? 2-4.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was trying to figure out if they won 2 or just one game.
No, they went 2-4. They got rolled on by Washington twice in 3 weeks in very big games. Their best offensive player got hurt. Their second best offensive player couldn't hang on to the football this year. Their backup quarterback, who they paid $7 million to come in, looked like it was his first year in the NFL. And their offensive line, I think, was on their 6th string left tackle by the end of the season. So, injuries and all that aside, Dallas really disappointed because you had the flashy hire of Mike McCarthy coming in. He's got the Super Bowl pedigree. He's coached Aaron Rodgers for years. He's going to be the guy to, to fix what they're doing on offense. And nothing changed from what they did the previous year. If anything, they got worse.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it from the defensive side, a lot of high-priced players on that defensive side of the football. And if you were to look at their defensive stats, I'll bet you wouldn't even consider one of their players being worth $7 million. But when you look at everybody that they had in that defense, I think when I checked, they have 7 players who are making $7 million or more on the defense.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely asinine. 2 of which aren't even on the team anymore, by the way. They paid them to go away.
That's always a good sign, right? Recipe for success.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say, and the one bright spot, and this is a shout out to a local Ottawa talent, Neville Gallimore. He's the 3rd round pick of the team this year. He stepped in, midway through the season, was starting at defensive tackle, and by all intents and purposes, I thought he was fantastic. I thought he held up very well, and you saw their defense took a little bit of a turn when he went in the game. So shout out to the local product, Neville. Nice to see him, doing so well for himself. Now the rest of the defense needs to get their stuff together and figure it out. But yeah, I mean, Dallas was by far, the most disappointing team to not make the playoffs. As bad as the Jets are, no one picked them to make the playoffs. So it can't be disappointing when you're picking them to go 3-13 and they go 2-14. So the runner-ups I had were Minnesota. I think Minnesota had some high hopes coming into this year, and the wheels fell off. You look at their offensive numbers; they were number 4 in total offense. Mike Zimmer's a defensive guru, so what happened to the defensive side? I don't know. You look at Houston. Again, Houston had all the chances in the world to take over that division, but some questionable management decisions to trade away some talent and to trade in for some questionable talent for draft picks was ultimately their demise. And I think Arizona, with everything that they had in front of them, all they had to do was win one of their last 2 games to make the playoffs, and ultimately they fell short. Now Kyler getting hurt and not being able to play at full strength that last game, kind of had the writing on the wall. But the week before, no excuses. They got to win that football game to get in. But again, Dallas is by a landslide the most disappointing team. If you think anybody who put money on teams, I think Dallas and Tampa Bay were probably the 2 teams that people were really high on at the start of the season to make a Super Bowl run. And one of them is still there and one of them is not.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that they're still building casinos in Vegas there, right? All sorts of dashed hopes on that front for sure.
Yeah.
Also shout out to, go figure, 2 Ottawa guys playing on the same defensive line there, Eli Anku.
That's right. Eli is.
So can't forget about him there as well. Good Canadian kid, as Grapes would have said there. But
yes,
yeah. You know what? I'm going to stay in state, and you stole a little bit of my thunder there. But my most disappointing team was the Houston Texans here, and to me, it wasn't even close because you've got the 3rd worst record in football after being a playoff team last year, mind you. And you don't even own that 3rd overall pick. It's going to Miami. Like, honest to God, like, how do you mess up that badly that you're going to go and trade away arguably one of, if not the top receiver in the game, but consensus top 5 wide receiver in the league here, for an injury-plagued, aging running back, and you're not getting additional high compensation in that trade? Like, it was mind-boggling on that front, right? You lose your number 1 offensive weapon. Okay, there's strike 1. Bill O'Brien somehow, like, he must have had incriminating photos of the owner or something to have held on to not only the coaching, but coaching and GMing roles for as long as he did there. The team essentially quit on him after week 3, I think, and it wasn't long after that he finally got canned. So again, not a great look there. You've got JJ Watt, who is under contract for 1 more year, but you have to trade him now because there's not a chance in hell he is going to go back and re-sign with the Houston Texans, right? They don't own the number 1 pick. Looking at their top to bottom roster, who are you really excited about on that team outside of Deshaun Watson? So they're going to be a crappy team for at least the next couple of years until they can sort of do that reset and rebuild through the draft.
Yeah.
unfortunately end up squandering most of Deshaun Watson's best years in his career there in the
Yeah.
process. But if you're
Yeah.
JJ and you're a free agent and you know you've got maybe another 3 years of productive football left in you, and then maybe you get another 2-year sort of bridge deal right off into the sunset, are you really going to spend that in rebuild mode with Houston, even as much as you love that community? So you now need to trade or let walk for absolutely nothing your
Mhm.
franchise player, your most beloved community member, an icon of your team here. And who knows what you're going to get from it, because everyone knows you're trading from a position of weakness right now.
Yeah.
You're not 1 or 2 pieces away from making another run, and then he gets happy and he resigns and away you go there. Like, this is a multi-year process. So if you could have maybe gotten a roster player and a 3rd or a 2nd round pick for him there in last year, this year, like, you'll be lucky to get a mid-round pick and maybe someone on the practice squad. Like, teams are going to take advantage of that. So now you're selling a huge loss, one of your greatest assets to your organization.
Yeah.
And then on top of all of that, right? Like, you look at the fact that what have they really accomplished in the trades they've made over the last couple of years, right?
Yeah.
You traded your left tackle, Dwayne Brown, to Seattle, right? Thinking that you have this glut of offensive line talent. And then within months, you're now having to trade for Laramie Tunsil here, who was struggling to, stay on the field and stay healthy the last little while. So, like, even the trades you have made, forgetting the DeAndre Hopkins debacle, which is indefensible on no matter how much of a Bill O'Brien fan you are. I don't even think his wife could defend that trade to me right now. But like, what have they really done as an organization to excite that fan base, to keep Deshaun Watson happy, right? Like, all I think about, and it's obviously very, very different in the NFL, but you look at sports like soccer, you look at sports like the NBA, all of those leagues are going player empowerment era. At some point, it's going to start trickling down into the NFL. And does Deshaun Watson just pull a Lev Bell and say, I'm holding out to training camp and, trade me, or an Antonio Brown or something like that? All former Steelers, which is weird trait you guys have in the players over there. But right, like, if I'm a Houston Texans fan, not only was this a terrible season, but I can't be excited about the future at all for the next couple of years.
Yeah. And, just to kind of add on to that too, I mean, I'm not surprised at all that you went with a team like Houston, because, there's really not much to look at from a positive perspective, especially when you look at the fact that they don't have an opportunity to take a game-breaking talent at number 3 overall because of a trade that they made. Now, what I will say is, going back to my comments about how important an offensive line is, Laramie Tunsil was graded out and projected to be a top 5 left tackle at the NFL when they made the trade. When you do that, you are trading on that potential. So you need to give up, quite a bit of draft capital to do so. Now, last season, he performed very well. This season, he took a step back with injuries and with poor performance. So the trade just looks that much worse right now. But if you were to say, I have a chance to draft Laramie Tunsil at number 3 overall right now to shore up our left side of the offensive line, would you draft Laramie Tunsil?
Well, this year? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too, though, all I'm trying to point out is, name me one trade the Texans have made that they've won.
Oh, no. And again, I was going to go complete opposite end of the spectrum for the rest of my comment here. So, that was the one trade you could argue that they gave up fair market value for. It probably still was too much, but you can make the argument. The rest of the trades that they made, you cannot make that argument. They traded away Jadeveon Clowney for, a bag of popcorn. They traded away DeAndre Hopkins for...
What's worse than a bag of popcorn? Bag of peanuts? Where are we in the food chain?
Depends on where you get the popcorn from.
Yeah.
But I mean, you trade for a name in David Johnson, and you traded for the 2016 version of David Johnson, not the 2020 version of David Johnson.
Yeah.
So the 2020 version of David Johnson probably runs a 4.8, 4.9, The 2020 version of David Johnson doesn't catch the ball well out of the backfield. And the 2020 version of David Johnson doesn't have Bruce Arians calling his plays. When you look at what you give up in DeAndre Hopkins, you look at the step forward that Kyler Murray took, this year in his game, and you could really chalk that up to DeAndre Hopkins being there and being that, go-to receiver that if he needed a tough catch on, 3rd and 3 or a Hail Mary at the end of a game to come down over 3 defenders.
At what point are we going to mention the
Yeah.
Hail Murray?
Yeah. So he's going to be, he's going to be that type of guy. So if you really have an impasse with a player like a Jadeveon Clowney or a DeAndre Hopkins, and I mean, you're sensing a theme of players getting disgruntled in Houston and wanting out and not getting fair market value for them. So, when you are trading people like that, you need to make sure that you are getting back everything that you can. And if you are not getting a 1-for-1 swap of a great talent for a great talent, you need to get several pieces to fill in and several pieces of draft capital to, hopefully hit a home run and draft a replacement for that player and fill in other needs. That didn't happen, right? You get a guy who, David Johnson, he's a great guy, was a great player for 3 years. I think, people would put him in the consideration of being the top running back in the league for 2 years. But that was 2015, 2016. DeAndre Hopkins is a 28-year-old receiver who is the top 3 receiver in the league right now. So that ultimately is unforgivable. And the fact that they don't even have the 3rd overall pick this year to fill in for that replacement, it really is tough to come to the defense of a Bill O'Brien for making that trade. Because as good as Brandon Crooks was this year, he's not DeAndre Hopkins. As good as Will Fuller was this year until he got popped for PEDs, he's not DeAndre Hopkins. You can't replace that type of player easily, and you obviously see that. So, Houston is definitely a great choice for being the most disappointing team of the league this year.
So I couldn't remember what it was off the top of my head here, but it gets better for that Tunsil trade, which we originally were saying, okay, maybe. So
it was 2 first rounders, yeah.
Yeah, it was 2 first rounders and a second this year. So this is the year as well that you don't want it to be
no
anything. So they went 26th, 3rd, and 36th, plus a roster player in cornerback Johnson Batamosi, who I have no idea whether he's actually played a snap or not. If you're going to say all 3 of those things for Tunsil, no.
So, yeah, that's no. That's definitely a little bit more ugly on the surface. So,
but yeah. I mean, on that sort of same vein, as far as there's a reason Bill O'Brien got fired, right? There's obviously quite a few, head coaching vacancies out there, possibly even more if my Doug Peterson conspiracy theory comes through here or not. Which, by the way, that was also why I didn't choose the Eagles as the most disappointing team this year, because we're already coming up to like an hour and a half on this episode. We'd be here till really a 4-hour day if I started on them. But yeah. Given all the vacancies that are out there, if you're a head coach looking to have your pick of the litter, right? You're the next Vince Lombardi, and you can literally pick any situation to walk into. Who is the most appealing to you and why right now?
Well, on paper, I think the Chargers are the obvious choice. You look at the talent they have in their roster. They got a young quarterback. They've got a new stadium. Living in LA wouldn't be that bad. That's a pretty enticing spot for a lot of coaches. But because I'm crazy and I'm a glutton for punishment, I actually would like to take over the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah. Not to spoil things here, but I also picked them as well here too.
Did you?
Let's see your rationale other than working on your tan down there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you look at Jacksonville and let's put this all out there. All of the 6 teams that currently have an opening, the expectations for winning there is absolutely low because none of them have a penchant for winning playoff games, winning Super Bowls. They're all teams that are doing this every 3 or 4 years. So
the one exception though to that, and one of the reasons I didn't pick them would be the Atlanta position, because you've got the aging stars in Julio and Matt Ryan, and you've got to do something with them and Ridley. before their window fully closes. So I think there is a little bit of an expectation there. Like you say, I would never pick them even as a top 10 Super Bowl contender for next year.
Yeah.
But I still think with that ownership group and the fact that they still have such a sour taste in their mouth from the 28-3 debacle, they still think that they're just, a piece or two away from being NFC South champions here. But that's why I steered clear of them, because I don't think the expectations meet the reality there.
And then that's the thing. I think that's the problem that a lot of teams fall into, and that's when they get into the Houston situation where you don't know where you're going, you don't know who you are as a team. Yeah. Are you the team that's still chasing that championship that you lost 3 years ago? Or are you the team that has these players who ultimately are in the last 3 or 4 years of their career that you need to maximize? But do you trade them away? You let them walk? You have to tear that whole thing down and build it up from scratch. Because if you don't win when they're there, well, guess who's walking up the door with them when they're gone?
Yeah.
You are.
So you're completely clear with the state of Georgia there.
Exactly. So, the reason that Jacksonville is very enticing to, I think, a lot of coaches that are out there, and obviously the rumors are Urban Meyer is being lured out of retirement to take over that spot. They've got a very young roster overall. A lot of young pieces. They've got a lot of draft capital over the next couple of years, and they've got a ton of cap space because of all the guys that they moved in the last 2 years. The division that they play in is probably the easiest out of all of the other teams that are available. Indianapolis, who knows where they're going to be next year with the quarterback situation. So, that could be a factor. Tennessee, are they going to be able to maintain that level of dominance in the run game and keep that going for the next, 6-7 years? Probably not. And then you look at Houston. Well, we've already hit them over the head numerous times. So, the opportunity for Jacksonville to be a quick turnaround is actually, pretty available. When you come in as a new head coach, you're typically brought in by a GM, right? They hire you, you're their guy. This situation, they need a GM and a head coach. So the unique spot about all this is a lot of coaches now are being hired, and they're actually being given 2 roles, one of which is the head coach, but another one is the VP of player development or VP of football operations. Mm-hmm. What that means is they get to actually go out and choose which GM that they want to pick their players for them to coach. And that is a position of power that I think any coach would look at as being, that's my ideal spot. Mm-hmm. You look at what they have in front of them, which is the number 1 pick in a draft class that, many people are saying is a generational talent, Trevor Lawrence. But now you can kind of throw Justin Fields into that too and say, I've got my choice of 2 very high-end quarterbacks that can change my franchise around like that. And that obviously is what coaches dream of, is being able to come in and picking your guy and being able to grow with them as you go. And along with that, you want to be able to take a team and mold the team in your image. Like I said earlier with Mike Vrabel, you want to be able to have you out there on the field in the body of 11 other players. So, you have to look at it as, I'm the CEO of the company. I want to make sure that the company is me. And when I'm a head coach, my players need to represent who I am on the field and off the field. So if you want a situation where you want to walk into and have all these things available to you, Jacksonville has everything, lined up for you to go in there and actually do those things. The one thing that would be a hindrance from going there is apparently the owner is trying to get a little bit too Jerry Jonesy, over the next little while. And he actually wants to run football operations. So that could be a red flag for anybody coming in saying, well, if this guy wants to come in and, overrule everything that I'm trying to do, then what's the point of me being here? So if that is the case, that's a huge red flag. But all those other things that I just mentioned just make Jacksonville so enticing for every head coach worth their weight in salt to say, I want that job because I want to make sure that Jacksonville is a team that, one, nobody really cares about. They're just the 32nd team in the NFL that fills the division. What better way to stick it to people to say, hey, you know what? Well, I won a Super Bowl with that, with that team that nobody really cares if we win or lose or not. So, for all those reasons, Jacksonville really is the perfect spot for any coach who wants to come in and take over a franchise.
Yeah. Well, it's for all those reasons, right? And the other, again, the same wavelength here. The other franchise I was thinking of too was the Chargers, just because you've at least got that quarterback, right? You've got some nice pieces in there. LA is nice, but it's some of the external factors there as well too. Is with almost said San Diego there, but being in LA, right? It's a weird city. Number one, they're not a huge football market to begin with. The failed, how many versions of the Rams have they had now? And then the Raiders were there. And then, anyways. But you're always going to be that almost Los Angeles Clippers to the Rams in that city. For, even as little fanfare as they've got, like the Chargers have had trouble even meeting like NFL minimums for their seat licenses and season tickets, right? For a while they were playing out of that soccer stadium there, and they weren't even filling that, and that it was like a third of the capacity of a normal stadium, right? So maybe if they were still in San Diego, I would take a longer look at that. But I think that they've also maybe fallen into that trap of, look at everything Herbert's doing this year. Next year, like, buckle up, we're going into warp speed. And if it takes maybe 2 or 3 seasons for those guys to fully get your people in there and your claws into it, right? Is ownership going to get a little panicky and say, all right, well, Kirkwood wasn't our guy for the job here, so he's can't, right?
Yeah.
So, that's how I ended up with Jacksonville as well too, right? The number 1 pick overall. Again, call it conspiracy theory. I think Urban Meyer is just getting floated out there as a sick ploy to trick Jets fans into thinking that Trevor Lawrence might still somehow fall to them because he's going to pick his guy in Fields and all that. And then, honest to God, like if I were ownership, even if I did bring in Meyer, I would sit him in a room and say, like, listen, this is contingent on the fact that we are drafting this guy number 1 overall. I think Fields is going to be good, but I don't even think it's going to be close. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be the most polished product to come out of college football since Andrew Luck. He's going to step into the league from day 1 and be ready to go, right? Like whatever records Herbert set this year, buckle up, because they're lasting less than the full calendar year. Like that's how high I am on this guy there.
Yeah.
Not to mention, Jacksonville has something like $100 million in cap space. You want to have free reign to mold that team in year 1 into your image. You're not going into a situation where, look at all these bad contracts we've got. And da, da, da. Like they literally posted a graphic of Doug Maroni's team in 2017, and then Doug Maroni's team at the time he was fired. And of the entire roster, including practice squad players, I think there were only like 8 or 9 players left on that entire team in 3 years, right? Yep. They've got some nice pieces. James Robinson came out of nowhere, literally undrafted, and became the bell cow, running back of the league, right? You've got Chark, who's a nice little piece. You've got some nice pieces on the defensive line there as well, too. You got Chase on, and Allen was hurt for a big portion of the year, but, so at least something to build off there. And you've got that number 1 pick, right? So you're going to get your quarterback of the future who from day 1, it's not, this is how we're running our offense and Like you can literally sit down and work with him as far as, all right, we're both here on day 1. What works for you? Let's build this offense around you and use all that cap space to shore up the defensive side of the ball. And, use your draft picks to pick up a few extra pieces. Don't pull a Cincinnati and have a leaky offensive line and suddenly Trevor Lawrence is getting carted off week 7 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you can just have so many good things going onto it. On top of the fact that, football aside, Florida has no state income tax. Whereas
That's right.
California is one of the highest tax brackets in the league, right? Yep. You get to keep more of your money there. Pretty much the same friggin' weather as California. So again, warm climate. Tom Brady got down there and he's already saying he's never going back to a cold weather city again, right? Took him less than a year to flip the page on good old New England. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty much rock bottom expectations for you.
Yeah.
Right? That is the location where even if you go 2-14 next year, Well, he still won one more game than this year. And then the next year, you only go whatever, 6-10. Okay, well, now look at the progress you're making. And then suddenly it's, well, this is a team that's improving every single year, longer leash, maybe you get an extension, and then you finally make that playoff run because they're not going to make the playoffs next year. They're probably not going to make the playoffs the year after either. You're going to need a runway to get that team up and off the ground there. And going into a situation like that, I think that is probably the ideal place because I'm sure they've got lots of passionate fans, but I have yet to, in my life, see anyone walking around with a Jacksonville Jaguars jersey on. So, I know they're out there because at the beginning of the year, before there was even week one, I posted something on social media saying like, "Oh, they're already tanking for Trevor and they're going to go 1-15," and then they won week one. And out of the woodwork, all of these northern Floridians started coming at me on social media. Oh, we're going playoffs this year. Well, he still ended up going 1-15. So yes, got the last laugh there. But I mean, it's an ideal situation for any coach to be
in. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that if you were to rank them, I mean, Jacksonville number one. I look at the Jets being a very enticing option as well, because again, it's the exact same with the complete opposite expectation from that fan base. There's something about a passionate fan base that you love. And the New York media can be daunting for a lot of people, but being able to come in and if you turn the Jets around and you can make them into a perennial playoff team and eventually even go to a Super Bowl, you're a made man for life. New York will embrace you with open arms.
Namath is still milking that one Super Bowl.
Absolutely. That guy's never bought a beer in New York in his life after that game. So, I mean, you look at it going forward. I actually, again, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I have the Lions number 3.
Oh my Lord. Well, now with your beard and your backwards hat, all you're missing is the pencil behind your ear, and you've got a little bit of Patricia-esque vibes going on. So.
Hopefully, I'm not as I'm not as unapproachable as that guy is. But
are your notes laminated?
If you want to consider a cell phone laminated, sure. But no, I mean, I think that just the challenge of being able to be the guy who takes the Lions to that next phase. That's something that no one really has been able to say in their lifetime. Then I got the Chargers. Again, they're the easy choice. Nothing about that team, says I don't want it. Then I got Houston, and then Atlanta is my absolute last choice. Because again, you don't want to be in a situation where you're in no man's land and you really don't know what's going to happen with that team. Is Julio Jones going to be hurt for 10 games out of the 16 again? Is Matt Ryan finally going to start breaking down? What's going to happen with the run game? Because that was a mess this year. Like, there's just too many variables that make Atlanta a not very attractive option, on the surface. But obviously, they're going to fill that void. And, one thing I wanted to ask you is, out of all these vacancies, who do you foresee kind of filling these roles from, the rumors that you're hearing out there from coaching candidates?
I mean, again, jokes aside, I said it was, just glutton for punishment there for Jets fans to say that Urban Meyer wasn't going there. But everything I'm reading is, as soon as the college football playoffs are over, it's as good as done, right? So I think he's probably going there. If that doesn't pan out for whatever reason, and I'm still a little bit shocked to even hear that he would want that position, just in the sense that he's at such a power program. And didn't he take his initial retirement from Florida because of health problems and all of that? And
so Urban Meyer's not actually coaching right now. He's in the booth. He hasn't coached for a couple of years. So that's, I think, why it's more shocking that he's even considering coming back, because he stepped down from Ohio State 2 years ago for health reasons, just like he did in Florida. So, I mean, I don't really necessarily understand it, but I mean, the guy everywhere he's gone has won. Taking over a team of young college-aged players, I think, suits him very well. And I think that, he'll put together a staff that can really, do some nice things with a team like Jacksonville. So, plus he knows the college landscape better than anybody. So drafting players is going to be, not easy, but drafting players will come easier to him than a lot of other coaches would.
Yeah, well, and that's why if it's not him, I wouldn't be surprised to see Dabo go to Jacksonville and just literally follow Trevor, right? And
Mhm.
make that jump. I can sort of see that happening. I'm interested in seeing where Kansas City's offensive coordinator ends up.
Eric Bieniemy,
'Cause
yeah.
he's already, obviously can't take meetings quite yet there, but I'm pretty sure he's got his pick of the litter, and whichever
Yeah.
job he wants would be his, unless the Urban Meyer, rumors are true for Jacksonville there. But I mean, he's got to be a hot candidate right now. I would be looking at maybe even, Buffalo's offensive coordinator or even quarterbacks coach, just in the job that they've done with Josh Allen and how they've
Mhm.
turned him from the most wildly inconsistent, inaccurate passer to what we're seeing this year. And
Yeah.
especially if you're going to be coming in and working with, if you do go to a Jacksonville where it is going to be a number one pick, where if probably a quarterback or wherever Fields ends up working with that young quarterback and transitioning into the NFL, that might be a good fit there as well too. I mean, you would probably know better than I, but like, who are some of like the defensive coordinators that are getting some of the most heat right now?
Yeah, so, the guys that are really at the top of the list, Robert Saleh from the 49ers,
Yeah,
he's obviously built a pretty big powerhouse there on the defensive side in San Francisco. He'll be a pretty attractive option for people. He was getting some traction last year, but opted to stick with San Fran. Wink Martindale from Baltimore, he's apparently getting some traction, with what he's been able to do with that Baltimore unit that lost a lot of guys and had to fill gaps this year and ultimately finish as a top 10 defense. And then his name's escaping me. Matt Eberflus from Indianapolis.
yeah.
Apparently, he's because again, I don't know if you know about the situation that he ended up finding himself in when he got hired by Indianapolis, but Josh McDaniels was the one who hired him and then quit.
Yeah.
And then Matt
With Frank
Eberflus was
Reich.
under contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then he had to adapt his coaching style with Frank Reich coming in, and he's done it seamlessly. So, I mean, being able to do that and kind of adapt on the fly should bode well for him. So, I mean, those are some of the defensive coordinators that would be at the top of the list. And yeah, like Eric Bieniemy from Kansas City is he's the guy that I think everybody wants
The
to
sexy
wants to
name
bring
right
in.
now.
Yeah, so I think with him, and going into the college ranks, I don't think Dabo is ready to move because he just signed a new contract with Clemson last year. He's set for life there. The guy's done so much at that school. The one guy from college I do see making a jump to take over a team like a LA Chargers is Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You look at what he's been able to do with that offense. He's pumped out, three straight Heisman Trophy candidates, two straight winners. Um, you know, he's very innovative. He's developed a lot of players that are doing well in the pros right now. I think that's a guy who can make a jump to the league and really, set in very seamlessly with a team like a Chargers because you've got the young quarterback you can relate to very well. You can mentor him and kind of mold your offense around what he does well, which is exactly what all of his quarterbacks at Oklahoma were doing for him. Um, so I mean, I think that could be a good fit. Obviously Urban Meyer's off the table for hypothetically listening to the rumors with Jacksonville. I think a guy like Eric Bieniemy eventually would settle in a place like Houston just for the simple fact that he's got Deshaun Watson
Mhm.
and then everything else you can build up around there. You look at how he would coach a game, it's exactly how Andy Reid would coach a game. And Andy Reid, I think, would probably be the guy to say, go where the quarterback is. And there's no better place to go than Houston if that's the case. So I like a guy like that there. I think the Jets, they're the wild card here. I don't know what they'll end up doing, but I think if you're looking at rebuilding and taking that new quarterback, you probably want a guy who's going to come in and shore up the defense, and really kind of take the pressure off that young quarterback. Bring in a guy who can come in and kind of run the offense, and like that's what a lot of these guys will do is they'll be the head coach and the defensive overseer, and then their assistant head coach will be the offensive coordinator, and then he's pretty much free reign to do whatever he needs to do. So I see a guy like a Robert Saleh ending up in New York. Um, and then you look at the last two with the Lions and the Falcons. Um, I mean, Atlanta's kind of one of those weird teams where I think you're going to find a guy, like a Wink Martindale who's a little bit older, who might go in there and step in to take over the defense. Or, what, Raheem Morris did an okay job. They'll probably give him, a little bit of an extended interview process to take over that team full time. But I think you're going to look at a defensive guy stepping in there. And yeah, I mean, as far as, where the Lions go, they've gone offense, defense. So, take your pick. Who's going to come in and be that kind of out of the box candidate who's going to take over and really look to do things differently than they've done in the past. So again, wouldn't be surprised if, they were able to coax someone out of retirement, or if they were able to get someone away from, another franchise to come and coach. So again, that's the one team I don't know where they're going to go, but time will.
I mean, as a Sooners fan there, I'm kind of hoping Lincoln stays pat for a little while longer. I think he's going to make the jump to the NFL at some point, just because he is so young. And, if he'd spent his entire career in the college football ranks, it would always be that, well, what if, right? So he's going to make the jump at some point. Like you said, he's produced Baker, Kyler, Jalen Hurts in recent years there. He's got a good prospect in Spencer Rattler, and had them not inexplicably lost that game, 2 games, but the one in particular to Iowa State there was horrible. But I kind of see him, at least I'm hoping, to be the type of guy who, all those college football playoff losses he took personally, and it's I want to get this done, right? And I kind of see him at least riding it out with Spencer Rattler, who was the number 1 quarterback, in the nation when he was recruited to Oklahoma there. Ride him out at least until he's draft eligible. If you still haven't won by then, okay, well, do you really want to go out and keep grooming, new quarterbacks, or is now finally the time to go out and, make that jump? So I'm hoping he leans that way, but at the same time too, that is a pretty nice situation to be able to step into for LA. So.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for sitting down with us and burning the midnight oil recording this there. We appreciate it. And we'll circle back in a few weeks' time there and see, especially those first 2 where we actually disagreed, how those play out. So thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to the follow-up conversation to see who owes the beer to who.
Yeah.